And I says, my God, here's something that was started in 1953, and this was well before the big push into Vermont for a lot of ski areas, such as Mount Snow and Bromley, Killington. Pico was there from, I think, in the late 40s. They had their Comstat ski bar. And I started realizing, I said, what's going on here? And I found out from discussion with Dr. Lane why the ski area closed, because it had so much promise. You're sitting on a 10-mile wide ridge, and if it had opened up, you would have seen an incredible ski area.
Welcome to Inside the Line, the Catskills. This episode is brought to you by Scenic Route Guiding. If you're ready to hit the trails, make sure you take the scenic route. Our guides are here to help you with your goals, big or small. Check out the Scenic Route Guiding and gear rentals on Instagram and Facebook for more information. Also, if you mention the podcast, you can get 10% off. Use the code Mountain Lion. Mountain Lion. Mountain Lion. Hey guys, thanks once again for listening. So I had to cut this episode into two different pieces because there was so much information and time that I spent with this guy named Russ, who knows a story about Bearpen Mountain, which used to be a ski center called the Princeton Ski Bowl. It's a very interesting story, very long, interesting story. So if you haven't already, check out the Bearpen story online by Russ LaChapelle. I'm going to say Russ L. Hopefully I got it right. He does a fantastic outline of the whole Bearpen Mountain story about the Princeton Ski Bowl. I'm going to post something on Instagram, Facebook, and probably Twitter about it, so make sure you definitely go and check that out before you listen to this, because it's going to make everything easier to understand. Russ goes all over the place with the information because he has so much information about this story. So, without further ado, part one of Bearpen Mountain, aka the Princeton Ski Bowl. Enjoy. Welcome, everyone, to episode 26 of Inside the Line, the Catskills. I have a special guest here with me tonight. His name is Russ, and he did a huge story on Bearpen Mountain. If you don't know the story on Bearpen Mountain, I will post links in the show notes. Bearpen Mountain used to be a ski resort, and it was going to be an amazing ski resort. So we're going to talk about that tonight. I'd like to thank our sponsor, Scenic Route Guiding. I'd also like to thank monthly subscribers, Katrina Weinig, Darren White, John Comiskey, Vicky Ferreira, and Jim C. So, Russ, question of the night, I ask everybody this. You having anything to drink tonight?
No, absolutely. Actually, I do. I have coffee, but anything strong, no. I'm not a participant in that area.
Okay, excellent. I just ask everybody that, and sometimes they might give me a local beer or a local, whiskey, and I'll post it in the show notes to give them a little love.
Okay.
Excellent. So I don't usually put history on here, Russ, but this is going to be about history. This is going to be about great history. One of my favorite histories in the Catskills. I love this. I love reading your story. I can't wait for people to read your story on the internet and the website. I'll post a couple of those because you've done a lot around New York State with the lost ski resorts, correct?
Oh yeah. I got involved in this as kind of a way to get away from one of my other addictions, which is collecting fight films, boxing matches that I did for a good 20 years before this.
Wow. Amazing. So let's get on to it. My guest of the night is Russ, and we're going to talk about Bearpen Mountain, who used to be an old ski resort and was going to be a huge ski resort. It's changed the dynamics of skiing resorts on the East Coast. So, Russ, how you doing tonight?
Pretty good.
Good. Hey, Russ, if you want to give just a little background about yourself, your skiing days, your young days, where you live and stuff like that, go right ahead.
Yeah, that would be kind of a good place to start because I was pretty intrigued at a young age about skiing. I became familiar with skiing, strapping on a pair of skis that my neighbor had, and behind their house we had a little hill. Generally, the hill was used for flying saucers, and we would make runs with that. And ice it up, throw water on it, and it was a lot of fun. It was a neighborhood gathering place during the wintertime. I grew up in Liverpool, New York, which is outside of Syracuse, so we were always getting the lake effect. Always had plenty of snow when I was a kid. And naturally developed, you run up and down just a small hill. I wanted to go for something better. So January 1st of 1966, I went to my first ski area, which is Song Mountain. And it was a cold, cold day. I can still remember outside lacing up my boots. And at that time, there were cable bindings that I had attached to these old Fisher Red skis. They had the blades on the bottom were screwed in. So it was, just a cheap pair of skis to do some business with. And that's where I finally first got on to really going skiing. And the way I would get to these ski areas would be through fathers. And I had a friend of mine who also skied. So he was my buddy. And what generally happened was my father would take us down, and then my buddy's father would take us back. And that was only based upon hours of work, time for both of them. And we skied Song quite a few times because it's located directly off of Route 81. It's almost like a billboard on 81. You can't miss it as you're going south towards Cortland. Also at the time, there was a place called Labrador, which is a little bit further, and we skied there. And there was also a place called Toggenburg, which is just a little bit beyond it, actually easier to get to than Labrador. And that's where we basically went. And at that point in time, all these skiers are fairly new. Song had been built in 1963. Labrador was a little bit before that. But their basic modes of transportation up the hill were T-bars. And we always heard about these chairlifts, especially at Greek Peak, which was way, way far from my parents. I used to argue about, we want to ski the chairlifts, we want to ski the chairlifts. Well, we're not going way down there.
What's the difference? A T-bar will just pull you up by your hands, right?
Yeah, the lift attendant would put it between two people. You'd be standing next to each other, and the bar would go between you, and it would go below your rear end, and you would just go up the mountain with your skis on the snow.
Oh wow, I mean, a lot of these people that listen to this probably have never seen a T-bar, so it's pretty neat. So continue. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, well, the T-bar is still around, but at that point in time, because of Hall lifts being located centrally, actually Victor Hall started out of his house in South Syracuse and then migrated up to Watertown. But the T-bar that he was building was almost over-engineered. It had a spring in the middle of it, and because of the location, most of these ski areas all had Hall lifts. All the ones I've talked about so far had Hall. Greek Peak was Hall, and they had one of the first chairlifts that Hall made. So it's just when you're on a T-bar all day long, you want to be able to sit down between runs. It was just, I guess as a kid, it was wow, this is cool. We could sit down and this type of stuff. So eventually, in 1966. Just shortly after Christmas, a new ski area in the area called Intermont was born. And what was fascinating about this place was it was built upside down. In other words, the lift and the parking lot were at the top of the mountain, and you would buy a lift ticket, and then you would ski down to the bottom, and then the trail to bring you up to the top. And that was within reason for our parents to take us to. So we went there shortly after it first opened up in '66, but its official first real start of the season was in '67. And what was interesting about this place is they had all-night skiing.
Oh,
so
wow.
and back in that day, it wasn't a big deal for parents to allow their children to do a few more things that they wouldn't normally let them do. Nowadays, you find there's so many things to worry about, and parents want to be protective of their child. our parents basically, my father brought us down, and my buddy's uh, father brought us back up, and it wasn't thought of that we were doing anything, that they were doing anything wrong. It was just something that, we put it forth to them. Hey, we like to go skiing all night long, and it worked out well, you know. So, but this place was so fascinating, and it had a chairlift, and so it had everything we wanted. And that year before that, we had in that area what was called the blizzard of '66. We woke up to, in February, 6 feet of snow in 15 hours.
Wow. Holy crap.
It was really something. So the ski area, Intermont was built with no snowmaking because they figured it was going to be. And what happened was the first 2 years of existence for snow for Intermont, there was a thaw that lasted. We didn't get any snow until after in about the second, third week of February. So it really screwed up the situation. The first year it happened. I later on did an interview with the guy who created the place, and he told me he went to the owners and they said, no, it's just a fluke. And then it happened again the next year. So they had two bad years to get going. He finally quit. Another guy took over. They put snowmaking in. They put what's called an air system in. It was a cheaper design than what you see commonly now in some of the bigger skiers, which is the state of art nowadays. But one of the attendants that was there all night long started drinking beer and fell asleep, and the system froze up. So that was the end of that. But this is where it all got very intriguing for me. And also during that period of time, I had gone to gas stations, and they used to have these maps where they had indication of all these ski areas. Some of the maps had some of the ski areas, others had others. So what I did was create my own map, and I had all these skiers, almost close to 100 of them in New York. And
Wow.
I also heard about all the skiing that was going on in Vermont, where there seemed to be more of a push than in New York. Although New York had a lot more than Vermont, Vermont had, it seemed like there was more of an insurgence of money. And plus the mountains were bigger, which of course as a young kid, that intrigued me even more. And I rode away to a lot of these ski areas to get brochures of the ski area. So as a B, when I was 14, my father got transferred to the Albany area, and we moved here, and I started going at that time to high school, and they had a ski club, so I got involved in that. And we used to take buses up to all these places in Vermont and so forth. And also, we had a church youth group, and some of the people that were in church were acting as chaperones, and they brought us up to places like Gore and Whiteface and such forth to go skiing. So I really got in my high school years a real good push on really skiing a lot of different places, the big places. So they really kind of migrated into a wonderful situation. And
Russ,
eventually, yes,
would you say that skiing was a lot bigger back in the 60s than it is now?
I would say the newness of it all created
Wow.
an ambiance for this type of situation. Yes, I think
Okay.
it's pulled back. I don't think skiing is on an uphill climb.
Yeah.
It's
Okay. I was just curious because it sounds like when you're naming all these places, it's just like, wow, it blows my mind.
yeah. Well, it became very popular. It's just like anything that's new. The availability of these mountains and stuff. They just started building them. I mean, a lot of them were well in place. You had Stowe and Mad River Glen and Killington, Pico, all these places up in Vermont. I mean, especially places like Stowe and Mad River. They were built back at the just before 1950, so they had a jump on just about everybody. And I think they were advertised, come to the ambiance of Vermont, and It was just they made it look like some big deal, and it really at that time was a big deal, you know.
Hmm.
And of course, New Hampshire had their fill, and of course, New Hampshire in the southern part had smaller areas, and then you got up into the Vermont, the White Mountains. I'm sorry, not Vermont, but the White Mountains, and there were big places like Cannon, which had a
Yeah.
tramway, which nobody at that time had. It was its own draw, and that's the way that went, and that started early. I mean, I think that tramway was there in the early 50s, if not before.
Wow.
And Maine got skiing like at that point in time. Sugarloaf, which is huge,
Yeah.
2,600 vertical now. They had they put in a gondola, but the rest of the list were all T-bars. They had no chairlifts.
Oh, wow.
So, and eventually they went through a big problem because it's so far up north that nobody wanted to drive all the miles to get to this fantastic place. And they ended up going through a bankruptcy thing, and somebody bought them out, and the rest is history as to what it is now, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So my passion at that point in time was to ski everything I could that was over 2,000 vertical, and I pursued that goal and achieved that goal. I also skied every place in the Northeast. That would be Maine, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Vermont, Connecticut, New Hampshire. I skied all the places. There, I mean, there's no big places in, say, Rhode Island or Connecticut, but it was a notch in my belt to be able to ski all the places in New England. But the big goal was achieved. It was all the places above 2,000 vertical. So that was how I spent my youth and into um, the time period before I went to college. And of course, when I was in college, didn't have any money. And also during that time period, we had a gas shortage,
Oh.
or what they called a gas shortage. And a lot of the chairlifts and stuff had at that time been running on gas, and they had to do a switch over to electric, and a lot of the places couldn't afford it. So that's when you first saw a lot of the places just starting to fall apart.
Oh, wow.
There was the one I can think of, Major League. There was a ski area called Petersburg Pass, which is right on the Massachusetts-New York line, and it went dormant for a year or so, and another guy bought it out and cut all kinds of trails. And the weather, and between the bad weather, there was a series of weekends where it would start snowing, then turn to rain, and then freeze and rain, and it just wiped out all their plans. I mean, they had that mountain, I think, had an 800 vertical before he bought it, and he was turning it into a 1,600 foot vertical.
Oh, wow. Crazy.
So that being, if it had survived, that one would have changed the, you know, you probably wouldn't have had a strong Bromley, or what at the time was Brody. Brody was a very, very popular area. It had intermediate skiing, night skiing, and it was very, very popular. It had a nice lodge, and they had a lot of things going. And but those places definitely would have been hurt because they couldn't compete with a vertical that big, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's how you know, and then I started working. I mean, I'm a flooring installer, and I went to, just like most people, you know, we go to work and you start become responsible, and
Mhm.
you try to do what you have to do to survive. So skiing kind of went in the back burner for me, you know. I mean, I went out and skied a few times, but it was more important to live my life. I guess I was maturing. I guess that'd be the best way to do it.
Yep.
You know?
Agreed.
So that's basically how I got, you know, that's the basic background of my interest in all this.
Yeah. So you basically are just a big ski enthusiast. You know, you love pursuing the skis.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I would study this stuff like it was going to be a math test or something, you know.
Yeah.
I had so much information, and I didn't lose any of it. I had retained it, and everything went along. And Then I ran into a guy when the internet came along who ran a website called NELSAP. It's New England Law Ski Areas, and he was in college up in Vermont to become a weatherman. And I called him up and I said, I know a lot about all this history stuff, because what he was doing was trying to find all these dead ski areas. He
Mm,
called them lost. I didn't particularly like that name connotation to it, because they never really you don't lose them; they just stop operating.
yep.
But that was his thing, and I was supposed to hook up with him on that, but he kind of went his own way as far as that went along. And I found a kid that had started a small little website about New York skiing. I contacted him to help him out, and I knew how to write HTML. And I said, I'll tell you what, I'll create all this stuff for you, and then I'll give you all the connections. And that's where I basically started taking all the research that I had already accumulated. And my goal was to go out and find out why all these ski areas died in New York. And I was limiting myself just to New York. I didn't want to go into New England because I figured he had that undercover.
Yeah.
And then I said, well, I really want to get the juice on this. So I tried to find the guys who built the places so I could find out what the real deal was.
Wow.
And through research with different people and going to these towns, and I used to haul my little Suzuki quad runner on the back of my car, and I would bring that to the ski areas and run around on the trails to see how they were set up. And then I would check with people in the town and said, do you know anybody who might be associated with this place when it was running? And I would eventually find the connections that I needed to.
Wow. Amazing. Awesome. I mean, that's a hell of a background. You are like pursuing everything. So I guess my next question is, you put a phenomenal website about the story of Bearpen Mountain. It is very well thought and well described. When did you start writing this story?
Well, I started that as an offspring. I did not really put together Bearpen, although, and I'm going to go back to my childhood, in my local town of Liverpool, there was a place called the Liverpool Sports Center. And of course, we as young kids used to go in there. We couldn't afford anything, but you went in there, and that time you saw a rack with all these head skis that had no bindings on it, and Hart skis, which were the two major manufacturers at that time. And we just go in there and start dreaming, because all I could afford was these little wood things.
Mhm.
Eventually, I eventually went to like a semi fiberglass / wood ski with what was called Cubco bindings. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they had little plates that were screwed to the toe piece and the heel of your boot, and you would slip them into this thing, into the binding, and that was how you were. It was the second step beyond a cable binding.
Okay.
And then, of course, then it went to step-ins like Solomon's and Look Nevada, those type of things.
Yeah.
But the reason why I bring this up is because I did not know this at the time. One of the guys that ran Liverpool Ski Center was a big pusher on the Bearpen, aka Princeton Ski Bowl ski area. And when I finally went to find out about this story, and through different people in and around the Prattsville, Roxbury area in the Catskills, I was getting information, and I finally hooked up with the guy who created it, Dr. Ben Lane. And he, through conversation, talked of all kinds of things, and he asked where I grew up, and I told him. He says, oh, the guy who ran the Liverpool Sports Center used to be one of our biggest supporters. And it was like kind of an ironic situation that here I have come not knowing about this. And I had remembered from my maps Princeton Ski Bowl, But everybody that kept telling me said, "Did you find out?" When I went to find the histories of some of these areas, these guys, because they were in the ski business, knew about Bearpen, and they'd keep saying, "Do you know about Bearpen yet?" And I go, "No, no, no." But little did I know that I had all along known about the Princeton Ski Bowl, which is on Bearpen Mountain. Okay, so once I got to Dr. Lane, I started realizing what was going on. I went, before I met him, to the mountain, and I went from the bottom figuring, okay, they must have skied down to the bottom, and I started walking up through the woods, and I would find all these stone walls, and they're untouched. And what had happened was the stone walls were created to mark off boundary lines and to keep the cows in. And I said, these things haven't been touched. How did they ski down through these things? And of course, talking to Dr. Lane, I found out that they never really skied. There was a trail that went down all the way to the mountain, but it wasn't. Dr. Lane had been trying to purchase the bottom property, but the deal went through. But they did allow for, at the end of the day, the trail that went down to the bottom of the land that he had on about the midway point of the mountain, connected to an open farmland, and then they could ski down at the end of the day to the base of the road. So that area did not have the stone walls. So that's how I found a little bit of tidbit about it. But looking at topographical maps and getting more information about the ski area, I started realizing what this place had and the time period that it was developed. And I says, my God, here's something that was started in 1953, and this was well before the big push into Vermont for a lot of ski areas, such as Mount Snow and Bromley, Killington. Pico was there from, I think, in the late 40s. They had their Comstat bar, and I started realizing, I said, what's going on here? And I found out from discussion with Dr. Lane why the ski area closed, because it had so much promise. You're sitting on a 10-mile wide ridge, and if it had opened up, you would have seen an incredible ski area, which had the jump on Killington. If anybody who skied Killington and knows anything about it, it covers a vast area.
Yeah, I've been there. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, Bearpen would have been well ahead of it.
Wow.
They were in negotiation with a gentleman by the name of Gene Pomagowski. And that name is important because he was a lift manufacturer who created the Poma lift, which was it was a pole with a little, like a 6-inch plate on the bottom, and you would slip the bar between your legs, and the pole would sit there. One person at a time would be brought up. Wow. So it had the characteristics of a T-bar, but a single operation.
Wow.
But at that point, see, Pomagowski was a detachable lift. In other words, when you went up to get on this lift, the attendant would have you put the lift between your legs, and you would move back to like a little box. The back of your skis would hit the box, and then you would wait. He would pull a lever, and it would engage the lift that you're on onto the cable. So it was a detachable lift, and that's why there was talk about, at that time, with Dr. Lane, the first detachable lift to be built, chairlift.
Wow.
Which would have, in that time period, they were talking 1958. You can imagine what that would be like. And of course, Bearpen is located in an area where you don't have to drive all the miles up into Vermont. In that period of time, New York State Thruway had been just built. So the timing of everything would have been perfect. There was no Hunter Mountain at that time. There was no Wyndham. There was Bel Air and Highmont, and that was about it.
Yeah. Like, when did you like a specific date? When did you start writing about this story? Like, when did you start gathering information?
Well, I was all the time talking with Dr. Lane, who is to this day, he's a practicing eye doctor.
Uh-huh.
So he's got a busy practice. So I would off and on, generally some nights, weekends, especially Sundays, gather a little information, I went down to his place and I found out that he had all kinds of pictures and information and this and that. And I asked him if I could take it up to my house and start scanning it. And that's where a lot of the pictures came from that are on the website and in the story. And as I finally got to a point where I felt I could do this thing justice with the information I had in my head, I started the story, and I would say that would be, oh God, that'd have to be about 1999.
Oh, wow.
And of course, they get to certain points, and then I have to juggle my words a little bit to. I didn't want to make it too lengthy, but I wanted it to be concise.
Oh, it's not lengthy. Trust me, it is incredible story.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I could have made it a lot longer. I could have gotten into a lot more detail about how it went bad, which maybe I can discuss now because it's an intriguing effort in itself because the ski area didn't fail because it wasn't popular. Let's put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, you can ask me to participate in that part of it whenever you want to. I don't know what direction at this point you wanna go with this thing.
Oh, we're gonna go as far as you can. So we're gonna.
Might be some other parts of this that might be important to you.
Yeah, we'll take we'll take that a little bit later, definitely. So I'm gonna go over the quick timeline of events, basically of Bearpen Mountain. Is that okay with you?
Certainly.
Okay, so if I remember correctly from your story, Dr. Ben Lane was skiing Bel Air, and he saw that Bearpen Mountain had some more rime on it than any other Catskill Mountain high peak. He pursued it.
Yeah, it stood out. Yep. It was very, very white compared to any other place.
Yep.
And the reason he came to know about this because after going back and checking the topography, see what he was involved in was an outing club, and he became president of the outing club with support from a gentleman by the name of Ralph Nader, who some people may know about. He went for president and stuff like that. He wrote Unsafe at Any Speed about the Chevrolet Corvair. It didn't have the engine in the front, and he was trying to get the car outlawed because he thought it was very dangerous. But Dr. Lane he got the idea that the club needed a place for them to ski. And he was looking all over the place. He looked for different mountains. He came to be thinking that the Catskills were the right place for a good reason. Logistically, it was in the right place for people up and down the coast. And I'm talking New York City, places in New Jersey, Philadelphia, even Washington, D.C., because at that time, the arterials the system for that, the Eisenhower interstate system had already started to flourish. The New York State Thruway wasn't quite in place at that time, but it was already on a map to be started. Yeah. And so he was going around trying to find places in the Catskills. One of his favorite places was Blackhead Mountain.
Yeah.
Because when he saw that developed over 3,000 vertical in the Catskills. It was ridiculous, you know.
Yeah, that's crazy.
But it didn't collect snow like what he found to be with Bearpen. And anybody who looks at a topographic map of Bearpen would see that it has on the west side of the mountain, or actually I guess it'd be the west. basically west. It has these big scoops, and where Bearpen sits, it's kind of similar to Plattekill, that it collects lake effect snow, and it also gets any coastal storms. So you can get bombarded by both things. But what's intriguing about it is the winds would come from the west, and it would blow the snow. It would blow up these curves and make the snow actually go up in the air and then deposit it on the northeast side of Bearpen. The Bearpen with a northeast kick exposure that it has is perfect for holding snow. So that's why he saw it to be so white all the time, because it was getting the best of all the worlds, you know. And
Yeah.
of course, when he went there and started looking at the mountain, in reality, the setup for a ski area is just perfect. I mean,
Yeah.
I came to know this place as utopia, because in comparison to anything I had found before, there was nothing like Bearpen. And because I had skied all these ski areas beforehand all over the place, it was just, I said, my God, I have found nirvana, you know.
Yeah.
And I basically gave up doing anything with the website as far as these ski areas. And I had a lot of people that I contacted that I was going to write all these stories, like I did for Bearpen. My first original story was with at the Simpson Slopes, which was the first real ski area in New York. They were the first one to have a rope tow. And I interviewed there was three brothers who ran the ski area. This is, you're talking before World War II, they started this place.
Oh, wow.
And New York State was involved with it, to supporting them. And this is all before Bel Air was built. And they organized ways to get these trains up from Kingston. People were able to ride the trains up to Kingston from New York City. They get on another train, go up, and they would stay up there at Simpsons. This little town of Phoenicia. Anybody who's been there knows there's not too much going on in Phoenicia.
Yeah.
And that was the first start. And New York State saw that their push at Simpsons had a real effect, and they actually went to the point where they went to legislation to change the Forever Wild Catskill Park so that they could build Bel Air, because there's nothing, part of the problem with Hunter that they can't expand. I mean, Hunter Mountain isn't really on Hunter Mountain. It's off to the side of it.
Yeah.
And anybody who's been there is taking a look at Hunter Mountain. And that was one of Dr. Lane's choices, but he was up against the same thing, it's Forever Wild, and you can't build on here.
Yep.
And the same thing has happened for Hunter. But the Slutskys did build a big ski area there. I mean, it's for a private area. I think there's nothing that really comes close to competing with the size of the mountain that they did. Maybe Wyndham, but Wyndham has a different feel to it than Hunter does.
Yeah.
And that came
Hunter
along.
has more vertical on some certain sides.
I think, more fall line.
Yeah.
It's, if you ski Wyndham, it tends, there are a few trails that at the very top are really super steep. But after a while, they have no flavor to them because they're straight up and down. They don't have any curves really to. There are trails that have that, but they're gentle in comparison. Hunter has some real interesting material to ski,
Yeah.
And of course, part of the reason why Hunter was built by the Slutskys in the early time, 1957, Dr. Lane commissioned the Slutskys, the I&O Construction Company, and they were road builders. The I&O would be Izzy and Orville Slutsky. They were road builders. So they were up on Bearpen building trails before Hunter Mountain.
Oh.
And their father owned what was called, it's really called Colonel's Chair. That's what that little extension that Hunter was built on. They commissioned people, they put advertisements to find somebody who wanted to build a ski area
Yeah.
and operate it. And they ran into the younger Hammerstein's son, and they went in with some money, and they basically rented the mountain, and the Slutskys built Hunter Mountain. And then Mr. Hammerstein developed a slight drug problem and couldn't afford to pay the rent and everything, so Orville and Izzy took it over, and that's where history went. Now it's owned by Vail, and both Izzy and Orville are dead.
Yeah. So, getting back to Bearpen, aka Prince and Ski Bowl, Dr. Ben Lane was a smart guy, and he chose Bearpen for a reason. It was because it caught the snow. How did he notice that it caught so much snow? He pursued it for like a reason, right?
Well, he used to go with the outing club, but they used to go ski Bel Air and Highmont. Matter of fact, he became good friends with the Davenports who ran Highmont, and they allowed him a key to get in there, and the outing club used to stay overnight in the lodge at Highmont.
Oh, nice.
But from that location, they kept seeing over time that mountain up ahead of them there that kept being white. And at the time, Ben was looking for the right mountain to develop a ski area for the outing club. That was his original intention. And after seeing it for a while, now he went up there in the summertime and found the locals who had lived there and started asking questions and became friends with them, and they took him up on the mountain, and he started putting the pieces together, and that's how it happened.
And you said in your story that there was snow located in like May and April, correct? Up on the top of the mountain.
Oh yes. They skied in May on a couple of years. Wow. Natural snow.
Unbelievable. And this was back in the 50s, correct?
This is back in the 50s. Yep.
So, I mean, to break it down, before you said that for some reason Bearpen would catch the snow on one side from the lake effect snow, and then the other side it would catch the coastal snow. So it was perfect.
Yeah, it's gotten bombarded with both ways. And because it had the northeast exposure, it held the snow.
Yeah, and plus it also had the amazing vertical drop that you were talking about, like 1,900 feet, correct?
Oh yes. He was looking at 1,900 vertical feet fall line straight down the mountain. He's looking at 1,900 foot vertical. Now, next to that area all these were all working farms. They were all cows, milk cows. There's a farm next door, and one of my good friends to this day, his father and mother ran a cow farm, and that land, if it had eventually been incorporated into the ski area, all the way down to the bottom was 2,120 foot of vertical.
Wow.
And it
was the Catskills.
It was set up in such a fashion that the real estate plan for it would have been sensational. I mean, you could have had two places right there where they would could have lodges and different parking lots. And that's just on that face. You can go over to the north of Bearpen is a peak called Round Top, and it has an area called Johnson Hollow. Now, actually, just to put this into perspective, if anybody really looks into this deep, on the west side of the mountain where the snow collectors are, there's a Johnson Hollow. And then on the bottom of Round Top, there's another Johnson Hollow. And it just got named that way because of the locals. Everything around there is based, all the roads have people who used to live there. You know what I mean? And they've all passed on, but the names of the roads continue. But over there, I mean, you had another part, and then that would continue over to a point at a town called Grand Gorge, which is where Route 30 comes into play, which is the road down to Plattekill. Yeah. And Plattekill got started because Dr. Lane got to know an architect that eventually, I mean, Dr. Lane wanted to do solar collection because where he was, he couldn't get telephone poles up there to electricity at the top of the mountain. So he wanted to create a lodge that had solar collectors. But the trouble was that there was so much snow going on and the amount of sunny days was limited. So the solar wouldn't work, and the lodging that would have been associated to that would have been designed by the guy who eventually went on in 1959 and built Plattekill.
Wow.
Which still exists to this day.
Yeah. It's crazy how it's all linked together. I mean, you're telling so much stuff that it just all links up one after another. It's crazy.
It certainly is. I mean, the first place that I went to to write a story was The Simpsons, and that was one of the reasons that led me again to Bearpen, outside of 3 or 4 people before that who had asked me if I knew about Bearpen yet. But the rope tows that were on Bearpen, actually the rope tow that Ben eventually built was the longest in the East at that time. And the Simpsons went up to Bearpen to splice rope for them, for that lift. So through my conversation with Augustine's Simpson's son, I came to know the significance of that. And then eventually I just pursued it, and the rest is history.
Wow. Unbelievable. It's so crazy how everything intertwines.
And that's all linked together. And, you know, I kind of, from my youth in and around Syracuse, you had the same kind of thing going on. All those ski areas were kind of incorporated into each other. And now they're all owned by the same people. So it's just kind of how it works, you know what I mean?
So do you think these places kind of like work together, or like one person kind of stole the idea from the other person?
Well, I think it's kind of a free-for-all. I think they are kind of in competition, but they're envious of each other too at the same time, you know?
Interesting. Very interesting. So from the beginning into the end of Bearpen, not really that much, but how long did the building of the trails and everything else take?
Well, they did it a little bit. See, the top of Bearpen, the top 100 vertical of Bearpen, you go from the summit that's 3610 about. There's conjecture as to exactly what it is because it's so flat. I mean, I've walked around up there on the top and I can't figure out where the exact high point of that mountain is. It's fairly level. It's not a large area, but you really can't hone in on it. I mean, I've heard 3600, I've heard 3603, 4, 3610, whatever. But the whole thing at the top, Bearpen has 100 feet of vertical at the top before it goes to like a leveler area. And that's where Dr. Lane built what he called the Lodge Level Trail, which circles the whole top of the mountain. Okay, at lodge level was where he put the lodge. Okay, and next to the lodge there was a bear wallow, which he had the workers come in with their bulldozers and stuff and expand that to an Olympic-sized hockey rink, so that people who came up who didn't ski or came with friends that did ski, they'd have something to do during the day. Yeah. So they could go out on this and ski, or go out and ice skate, and then go into the lodge where there was a round hearth with fireplace, and they had food, and off to one side there was a generator to create electricity, and they just kind of moseyed on along. But to get up to that point, Dr. Lane took an existing road that went from Route 2, Greene County Route 2, up the side of the mountain, and it went to a col between the Bearpen Range and Round Top, and then went back down through to the other side, where eventually, he had a parking lot intended on that side, so people who were coming up from Route 28, they could come up to that point, and he had these army trucks that people would be loaded into with their skis, and then it would be brought up to the top of the mountain. So you had them coming from both sides.
That was called Ski Run Road, correct?
Ski Run Road, yes. It became known as Ski Run Road. At the time of the operation, it wasn't called that. It was called the Prattsville-Vega Road.
Oh.
But once it got to the call, then Dr. Lane created a road along the top ridge to get over to the lodge. It's something that you have to really kind of go there to realize, okay? But it was the only way, because he didn't own the bottom of the mountain, to get what was going. And then plus, below 3,000 feet in the Catskills, your thaw rate is a little quicker because of different conditions. So the top of the mountain, the snow effect of the blowing over the snow, from 3,000 feet, it doesn't really do too much. You're under just what normally would fall from coastal or regular storms, okay? So in a way, the building of the 600 vertical at the very top was conducive to the amount of snow that would happen. You could get on the bottom of the rope tow at 3,000 feet and ride it up to the top, okay? Wow. And, remember, this is snowmaking at that time was like they were just sprinklers.
Yeah.
These guys were playing around with on Mohawk Mountain, and a real system wasn't created until Grossinger's, I think, in '56. Mm-hmm. So Bearpen had already been started by that time. But the whole thing of this was that he didn't own that bottom of that mountain, so this is the only way to go. Eventually, it would have happened. Eventually, it would have happened.
So let's go over quickly. After it was all built and they did everything. Let's go over quickly the features of Bearpen. Vertical drop. I remember you talking about 1,900 feet, correct?
Yeah, if you could, at the end of the day, they opened up the skiing. Everybody would gather together and they would ski down to the bottom of the mountain. See where the snow jitneys, the army trailers, they would leave from Ski Run Road, which is up at the top of a ridge. And from that ridge, you go down into the little Westkill Valley, and that's where the bottom of the skiing would take place. So during the day, you were skiing the top 600 feet. And at the end of the day, everybody who wanted to would gather together, and they would all go down together to the bottom of the 1,900-foot vertical. Whereas then there would be a truck that would come and they would pick them up and then bring them up the road to the top of where Ski Run Road is.
Crazy, 1,900 feet. So
again, you kind of have to be there to see what's going on here, but I'm kind of simplifying it in a way.